It's working now. Hey, good evening, everybody. If I could ask you to take out your cell phones again and turn them off, mute them, turn the volume down or whatever so we don't interrupt the speaker tonight, we'd appreciate that. My name is Jeff Patton. I'm the Vice President of the Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable, and we want to welcome everybody in attendance tonight. Thank you for coming out in the cold weather and the early bad roads. They turned out to be pretty okay, I think. If I could ask you to just please stand as able and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please take your seats. As always, we want to recognize our veterans, starting with our World War II veterans. I know I saw Irv and I saw Paul, so I know we have two for sure. If you'd raise your hands or stand up. And one more over here. Thank you for being with us tonight. Any other veterans in the room? About half of the room. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your family service as well. As always, we're a nonprofit, as you know, so our fundraising efforts to support our programs are greatly appreciated. We have the helmet committee in the back of the room, the actual World War II helmet that you can donate funds into as you leave. And we also have the book sales out in the hallway, as well as the coffee mugs for sale. So thank you for your generosity. So for this day in World War II history, in 1936, Adolf Hitler opened the 4th Winter Olympics in Garmisch. And because that's before World War II started, in 1943, Benito Mussolini removed Count Ciano, his son-in-law, from the position as head of Italy's foreign ministry and took over the position himself. He was executed on Mussolini's orders in 1944. Upcoming events, you saw a couple of them on the screen, on the slideshow. We also have them on our Facebook page. But one we want to highlight for sure is at AHEC in Carlisle, Army Heritage Center on Thursday, 27 February. And it's a program with Edward Aldrich called The Partnership, George Marshall, Henry Stimson, and the extraordinary collaboration that won World War II. So again, that is 27 February, starts at 6:30 at AHEC in Carlisle. I also want to let you know, I mentioned it last time, we have a World War II trip going to the Market Garden and in Germany to Berlin. I have a couple flyers. If people are interested in that, please come talk to me afterwards. It's the last week of April and the first week of May of this year. For upcoming roundtable speakers, next month, we have Colonel Ed Cottrell. He's a P-47 pilot, and he flew over the Battle of the Bulge and has a lot of great stories. Some of you might have seen him before. Great story, great storyteller, and I think he'll be 102 or 103. 103, right? Not to be outdone, but on April we have Frank Steller, who just turned 100, and he was drafted in 1943 and served in the 6th Army, 36th Division, and we're excited to see him speak as well. But for tonight, our speaker is Kevin Hymel, and he is a historian for Arlington National Cemetery, where he records events, ceremonies, and funeral services for future record. Some of his articles have been reposted on the U.S. Army and Department of Defense websites, and he's also a historian tour guide for Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours and leads World War II European tours of D-Day and General George S. Patton's battlefields. He's the author of several books, including Patton's War, An American General's Combat Leadership, Volumes 1, 2, and soon to be 3, we hope, Patton's Photographs, and Patton, Legendary World War II Commander. He has served as the research director for Sovereign Media, which publishes World War II History magazine, where he continues to write articles. His article, Fighting a Two-Front War, has been made into the Netflix movie 688, which has written and directed by Tyler Perry. There we go, lost my place. Mr. Hymel was a technical advisor on the film and is a former historian for the U.S. Army's Combat Studies Institute, where he wrote about small unit operations in Afghanistan as well. He has appeared on the History Channel, the American Heroes Channel, the Science Channel, C-SPAN, and Book TV, speaking about General Patton and military history. He's worked for more than 20 years for various military and organizations, military history magazines, and journals, and has worked as a researcher for the National Archives as a historian for the U.S. Air Force. He holds a master's degree in American history from Villanova University. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kevin Hymel.
Oh, you make me sound so good. Okay, I think everybody can hear me pretty well, right? I didn't realize I was going to be that loud. So anyways, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate this. It's nice to do decades of research and then, okay, that's good. To do decades of research and then be able to put it all together in books and then be able to present it to people. So I'm very excited to be here, happy to be here. Why don't we load up the first slide? Before I get started, I do think I should give a shout out to AHEC. I've done hours and hours of research there, particularly in their veteran surveys. And what they do, once they've surveyed a veteran, they categorize them by division. So all I had to do was pull the boxes on divisions that served under Patton. And I think it's question 8A or 18A where they say, did you meet anybody famous during your time at war? And so I would just go through thousands of these things looking for mentions of Patton. And they would be little stories or anecdotes. One time I found an entire unpublished manuscript and was able to add that to the books. So, you know, it's an incredible collection they have at AHEC, and I just really appreciate what they've got. So we got the first slide? I have a click. I'm in control of this. Okay, I feel a lot better about this now. So I'm going to talk to you guys tonight about General George S. Patton and the relief of Bastogne, or basically his offensive north in the Battle of the Bulge. Has anybody here seen the movie Patton? You can show your hands? Okay. So you remember the scene in the movie where he predicts the Germans are going to attack? He says, you know, the Germans haven't launched a winter offensive since Frederick the Great. Therefore, I believe that's exactly what they're going to do. Yep. Okay. So that prediction came from Patton's diaries that his wife had typed up because his handwriting was awful. And it comes from a certain spot. So I'm going to show you this. Oh, wait, are these in order? Wait a second here. We're supposed to start with his diary pages. Yes, I am. Guys, did I send you the wrong? Let's see. There's that. Okay, here we go. We're getting closer. Boom. Okay, so here's the diary entry. And somebody underlined this at the archives. And you can see where he says that they're making a terrible mistake leaving the 8th Corps static, as it is highly probable that the Germans are building up east of them. Okay? This is November 25th. Battle of the Bulge starts on December 16th. And you'll notice there's a number 1 there. Why is there a number 1? Because if you don't catch on the fact that he's predicting the Battle of the Bulge, back 1. There you go. At the bottom of the page, it was opposite 8th Corps that von Rundstedt broke through 21 days later. So Patton has predicted the Bulge. He knows something's up. He's got this incredible sixth sense. What I did in my research, I was able to go back to his handwritten diaries. And whoop, we're going to figure this out, don't you worry. That sentence is not there, okay? The sentence does exist. On December 27th, the day after he took Bastogne, he wrote that Bradley made a bad mistake leaving passive the front at the 8th Corps. So he wrote that the day after Bastogne was relieved. When his wife typed up those diaries, she took that sentence and moved it to November 25th, 1944. Okay? That is kind of the tip of the iceberg of what she did with his diaries. She eliminated a lot of his anti-Semitism, a lot of his racism, added entire paragraphs of opinions of people. So when people read my book and like, hey, you forgot the part where he hates, General Lee. Well, he didn't. That was added later. And to help her do this, Mrs. Patton incorporated the help of 2 of Patton's staffers. And what I realized in my research is they had a lot of scores to settle. But so now you know, for the record, Patton did not predict the Battle of the Bulge. I'm sorry to punch a hole in that. It's a big part of the myth. And every author, including myself, has used that prediction in writing their books or even the Patton papers by Martin Blummenson. I believe, I've not been able to lock this down, but I'm pretty sure the Patton family, when they gave the collection to the Library of Congress, forbade anyone to see the handwritten diaries for a couple of decades. I was only fortunate enough to catch this because of the pandemic. The Library of Congress did a special project where they digitized the handwritten diaries and then did, translate word for word translation. So I really benefited from that. So we've eliminated that myth, right? So now all I have to do is find the order of these slides correctly. You demand. Okay, so let's see if we go this way. So some other elements about Patton predicting the Bulge. His intelligence team, said that they started suspecting things. There was a buildup in the city of Trier. There were all these other elements. And so I wanted to back this up because I believe that there was this prediction. So I went to all of the intelligence reports for Third Army. And as you see at the bottom there, they have capabilities. The enemy is capable of defending and delaying. The enemy is capable of, counterattacking. The enemy is capable of a general withdrawal. The enemy is capable of reinforcing their front. That's a report from November. They repeat the same thing every report all the way up to December 16th. There is no grand prediction, all of this. There was a point where they did, Oscar Koch, his intelligence officer, said, there's a buildup in Trier. And Patton said, what does that mean? And he said, I don't know. So the fact that the myth that his intelligence people were making this prediction kind of falls apart. In fact, this is the report from December 16th. And you can see at the bottom, enemy capabilities, no change. See Third Army G2 report of number 186 from December 14th. It was so repetitive, they stopped writing it. They just said, oh, just see the last one. So there was no great prediction by his intelligence team. One other myth is that Patton was going to move his headquarters I'm trying to think of the name of the town, but he kept delaying it. And Martin Blummenson said, well, this is because he knew something was coming and he didn't want to be caught unawares while moving his headquarters. Wow, very great prediction. What really happened is that he sent a reconnaissance team into the city to move his headquarters, and they picked out a building at the top of the hill, but the Germans had left so many time-delayed explosives that while they were picking it out, the building exploded. And they said, well, scratch that one off the list. That's really why Patton delayed his move to his new headquarters. I'm just ruining everything for you guys, aren't I? So, Battle of the Bulge, December 16th, the Germans make this grand attack, really catching almost every Allied commander off guard, completely surprised. It happens north of Patton. He's starting to get reports that Middleton's in trouble. Omar Bradley contacts him, says, you got to move the 10th Armored Division out of your army, send it north. They actually tell the same thing to General Hodges, that they're going to move his 7th Armored further south. And, Patton is really kind of against this. He has plans. And when Omar Bradley and Eisenhower were talking about this, and Eisenhower said, tell him to move 10th Armored up, Bradley says, George isn't going to like this. And Eisenhower says, tell him Ike's running the damn war. So to me, that was really Eisenhower sort of taking control of this battlefield. But like I said, Patton's having his doubts. He doesn't know if he thinks Middleton, the commander north of him, is panicking. And so instead of moving the 10th Armored up, he calls a guy named Walton Walker, his corps commander just south of Middleton, and says, I think he's panicking. Why don't you go check on him? And later in the day, he calls back. He says, no, he's not panicking, and it's worse than we thought it was. So Patton, what does he do? He starts calling all of his armored division commanders and says, start moving south. We're not going to get stuck up. We're not going to get caught up in this. So he's not really reacting to the sound of the guns, and it's not the reaction of someone who's predicted this battle. He's initially trying to stay out of it, okay? And we're going to talk about this later, but the top and the bottom of the map, those are called the shoulders of the Bulge, and those are going to be very important. We're going to talk about them in a little bit. So now you got the general idea. So you got the German offensive moving east. Small units are trying to hold out. The 106th Division is going to have 2 of its regiments surrender. Patton will eventually tell a fighter pilot to go fly over the battlefield to see what he sees. And when he comes back, he says, I've never seen anything like this, the amount of armor heading east. And so this is starting to prep Patton that things might be worse than he thinks. So Omar Bradley's going to call him and invite him up to Luxembourg City for a meeting. There's Troy Middleton, he's the armor commander. He realizes that he can't stop this German offensive. So what he's doing with those elements of the 10th Armored and other units is he's breaking them into smaller units to try to slow the Germans down. Now his headquarters is in Bastogne, and the only reserves we have are 2 airborne divisions, the 82nd and 101st. Eisenhower's going to put them on a 24-hour warning. He's then going to send them into the battle. As we know, the 101st is going to end up in Bastogne, and Middleton is going to tell the division commander, Tony McAuliffe, I will be in touch with you. You've got to hold this position, but I've got you, as he heads south. So there's the 101st moving into Bastogne. You'll notice there's no snow. Okay, when all of this starts, it's really, it's overcast, it's very cloudy, but we're not looking at snow. That's going to come a little later. Boop. And there's Anthony McAuliffe. So he's now the division commander for the 101st. Why? Because the commander, General Taylor, has been called back to Washington to defend the use of airborne troops. There's a lot of self-inflicted wounds in the airborne, planes colliding, coming into low gliders, falling apart. But he knows that it is a vital instrument of war, so he has to go defend it. So McAuliffe, who's actually the artillery commander, takes command, leads the troops in there, is going to spread them out, make a perimeter. But at the time, they're not surrounded, okay? So there's Omar Bradley. So like I said, he invites Patton to his headquarters on December 18th, and Patton comes in, and Bradley is just exhausted. He hasn't slept in days. He's been dealing with this. He doesn't know where all these Germans have come from, and he's fighting the battle the best he can. And so when Patton comes in, he pulls back this map, and Patton, he's not impressed with the depth of the attack. It's the width of it, the size, that he's like, oh my God, this thing is really huge. And Patton actually kind of reels back for a second, and Bradley says, George, what can you do? And immediately he says, well, I can pull 4th Armored, a little bit west, turn it north. I can do the 80th Division, 26th, and just spouts it out, figures it out as he's talking. And this greatly relieves Bradley. Patton realizes he cannot go back to his headquarters down south in Nancy. He's going to spend that night with General Walker, who I just told you about in the north. And as he's leaving, he's realizing he's got to organize these troops. He's got to head them north. But how does he do it? Who does he send? And originally his idea is to send Walker north. His corps is the furthest north. It makes the most sense. But as he thinks about it, he realized it would be better to take his most southern corps and move that north. Now, I should explain. Patton has 3 corps, and corps are composed of divisions. 82nd Airborne, 101st, 4th Armored, 10th Armored. And so your corps are the guys in charge of all those divisions. Patton has 3 corps. He's got the 12th Corps under a guy named Mantenetti. That's the furthest up north. Walker's the furthest up north. South of him is Eddy with the 12th Corps, and that's the one he's going to move north. But he's also got the 3rd Corps, which is under a new corps commander, but that one's staying in reserve in the rear. So Patton realizes I can take the one in the rear and just turn it north. It doesn't have a direction. It's not on the front. That's the one that will eventually go to Bastogne, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so the original idea is to pull Walker in the north out and turn him north. What Patton realizes it would be better to pull Mantenetti out because he's not in so much of a fight and send that corps north. So we'll have 2 corps going north. Boop. So Patton's going to go back to his headquarters. He's actually going to spend the night with Walker, and he radios down and starts telling his staff, I'm coming back. We need to have a plan. So he does get back to Nancy, and he tells his staff, tomorrow morning, we're going to have a staff meeting. I want all of you to get a decent night's rest. So he could have come back and started planning immediately, but he realized this is a big deal. He wanted everybody clear thinking about this. So on the morning of the 19th, he has the staff meeting, And he says, okay, we need 3 options. And so the first option is obvious, we should cut off the Bulge at its base. Second option is to go to Bastogne because it's a major hub. And then the third option would be to just hit the Bulge on its nose. And what he does that's so smart is he gives each one of these attacks a simple code word: cent, nickel, dime. So he says, when I'm at this meeting, I'm going to call back, and I'm going to say either cent, nickel, or dime, and you guys implement that plan. So he's going to head to Verdun. In a lot of accounts, it's a schoolhouse that's very cold. It ain't no schoolhouse. This is a French barracks in Verdun. It took me about 3 years to find it. The local tour guide sent me to this little house, and they told me this is it. And I was like, there's no way. And fortunately, in my 3rd year of research, I met someone at the tourism office. I actually went to the archives and found photographs of Bradley's headquarters in Verdun, and I was able to show this to a young lady, and she said, oh, that's the French barracks where my dad works. So I had that, and if you ever wonder if a building is related to World War II in any way in Europe, it's always going to have a tank somewhere in the front yard. And it's very hard to see, but over in that corner is an armored carrier, and over in that corner is a tank. And I'm actually taking this photograph through a fence. I have yet to find the correct French diplomat to let me in. So Bradley's going to be at this meeting. Eisenhower's going to be at this meeting. A lot of Eisenhower's staffers. And Jacob Devers, okay? Omar Bradley is an Army group commander. He's in charge of 2 armies, 1st and 3rd. And Jacob Devers, south of him, is in charge of 2 armies. He's got 6th Army Group. And so what they realize they're going to do is they're going to lengthen his front, which would give Patton a smaller front, enabling him to move his corps north. So let's talk a little bit more of that. So there's Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton. They said that Patton was a little nervous when the meeting started. He was smoking cigar after cigar. And that when Eisenhower walks in, he says, I only want to see smiling faces. This is an opportunity for us to really stick it to the Germans. And Patton says, yeah, let's let them go all the way to Paris and we can really cut them off. And, George, that's great, but, let's not go crazy here. And Eisenhower really is taking command of this battle. I don't think he gets enough credit for it. And so, what is our strategy? What are we going to do? Remember I told you about, well, there's General Strong. So this is a British general. This is Eisenhower's intelligence officer. And he's going to start the meeting. He's got a large map with a pointer and kind of explain all the things the German army's doing. And everybody's kind of turning pale. But Strong later said, he goes, they all knew the information, but I think hearing it in one felt swoop is what caused all the anxiety. And so what are we going to do? What is our strategy? What is our plan? Well, the 101st and elements of the 10th Armored are fighting around Bastogne. Now, it's not encircled right now when the meeting starts. But Bradley knows this is sort of the nerve center. But Eisenhower, what he realizes with the Bulge, you've got to secure the shoulders of the Bulge. So if you look up north near St. Vith, a little bit north of that, is an area called Elsborn Ridge. And the troops in the north have already pulled back to this ridge, so they have the high ground with artillery. It's solid. The Germans are not going to expand any wider. Unfortunately, in the south, and you can see Trier in the south, the town isn't mentioned there, but right around where you see the 10th Armored going, where you see the shoulder, that's a town called Etternacht, okay? And Etternacht has really been forgotten by history, but it's an incredibly important element of this campaign because the Germans have captured it and it's on a river. So if Patton can take Etternacht, he has secured the southern shoulder, okay? So this is really important. So they start discussing what to do, and Bradley is the one that says, we really need to go to Bastogne, but they all know that Patton also has to take Etternacht. And so Eisenhower turns to Patton and says, what can you do? And he says, I can move a whole corps up there in 2 days. And Eisenhower says, don't be facetious. Don't joke. This is really serious what we have to do here. He says, well, if I have another day, I could move a second corps if you give me 3 days. And so they agree on 3. Now, in the movie, it's 2 days. It's very impressive. But when you actually look at the campaign and look at the days, it is 3 days. It takes him 3 days to get these troops into position. But it causes like a wave of electricity to go through the room because everybody's talking about defensive. Wait till the clouds clear up. We get a better assessment. Patton's ready to move. And so there are supply officers in this meeting. And they're like, if you start that, we can have trucks rolling down to your army to help them move. Like everybody's kind of jumping in. We can help. We can make this happen. There's an intelligence or I guess, what's the word I'm trying to say? He's a master of disguise officer. He's with what's called the Ghost Army, the guys with the fake tanks and everything. And so what they're going to do is start sending communications that the 4th Armored Division is going to go into reserve so that the Germans won't really be tracking it as much. So they really settle on this plan, and Patton turns to one of his staffers and he says, "Nickel." And so the staffer goes and gets on the phone and says, "Nickel." His staff knows exactly what to do. The meeting starts to break up, and as they're leaving, General Eisenhower had just been promoted to 5-star general. And as they're leaving, he kind of slaps Patton on the back, and he says, "You know, George, every time I get promoted, I get attacked." Because the same thing had happened in North Africa, just when he got attacked, was the famous, German offensive in Tunisia. And Patton turns to him and says, "And every time you get attacked, I bail you out." So I think that, I think Eisenhower was a good sport about that. So they head out, and Patton is not, like I said, he's not going to return to Nancy. He's going to go to Luxembourg City, and he's going to spend basically the next 3 days in a Jeep with his driver, a guy named Mims, and a radio and a map. And he's going to coordinate the movement of 2 corps north. And by the time his troops show up, his staff shows up in Luxembourg City, he says, "You guys are the biggest waste of taxpayer dollars. Me and the driver have been handling this entire thing without you for all that time." Again, he's being facetious. The guys down in Nancy have been working around the clock. Let's see, what do I have on this next one? So there he is out there on the Jeep, moving around. He kept a blanket on him to stay warm. And what's interesting is no matter how cold it is, Patton never wore the wool cap that soldiers wore during World War II. He absolutely hated it. He said, "You can only wear the wool cap if you have your helmet on over it." This is something he was adamant about in North Africa. The guy started calling it the $5 derby because if he caught you wearing it without a helmet, he'd fine you $5. It gets so bad, and this is not good, that when new divisions were assigned to 3rd Army, when they get into Germany, the troops had to line up and walk by trash cans and take their wool caps off and throw them in the trash cans. At one point, he comes across a platoon of guys, and they're all wearing the wool caps, and he orders them to line up against a fence and throw them as far as they can, and as soon as he leaves, they all went and retrieve them. But that's Patton. So the troops start moving north. I think this is the 80th Infantry Division. Again, no snow. Now, Patton, these guys were down in the south in what's called the Saarland. They had been fighting in rain and mud for months. And so to get out of that and to start heading north where the air is a little cooler, there's less mud, really raises the spirits of the troops. And just about all of them are going to pass through Luxembourg. A lot of them are going to pass through Luxembourg City. Now, Luxembourg City, during this attack, all the citizens started taking down their American flags and red, white, and blue bunting. In Omar Bradley's headquarters, I think it's the Alpha Hotel, they start putting trash cans and start burning documents. They're so sure the Germans are coming. And they said, these guys come into the headquarters with a 3rd Army patch on and start coordinating the counterattack. And the Bradley staffer guys are like, "Oh my God," they changed the whole atmosphere. And just the sign, just seeing the 3rd Army symbol on guys' arms just gave you confidence. Now the troops, if you've ever been to Luxembourg City, it's built over a huge chasm. And they've got these major bridges going across. Well, suddenly all these troops start coming over these bridges and crowds start going out and cheering. And what are they cheering? Patton, Patton, Patton. So they know who's in charge of this. And, Omar Bradley basically loses control of 1st Army because it's on the northern side of the Bulge. Eisenhower gives it to Montgomery. That's a whole different story. But Bradley, it's just him and Patton. But Patton was really, I think he understood how much this bothered Bradley. And so they would meet 2 and 3 times a day. And one time Patton goes into his office and Bradley said, "George, only come in here if you have good news." They were really kind of bonding over this. But if this attack fails, no one's going to blame it on Bradley. It's going to be on Patton. But if it succeeds, again, it's not going to be on Bradley. It's going to be on Patton. So here's the 80th troops heading up. Like I said, no snow. Boop. And so this actually, I got this out of the Patton files. This is the movement of 12th Corps. You can see down in Saarbrücken and everything. They head west to Metz, and then they start heading north to Arlon and you can see, I think you can see Eternacht up there. There's Dekirk, so it's a little bit to the right of that. And Patton needs to get to Arlon and check with Middleton about what's going on, the defense of Bastogne. You can see Bastogne on there. And he pulls into a town called Lowry, and there's a big white marble building there. It's like some electric company. And he realizes he has to have a meeting with some of his officers before they get up to Arlon. So there's a GI sitting at the end of this hallway reading a comic book. And he looks up, and here's Patton and his staff marching right at him. Has to stick the comic book in the desk drawer. Stands up, Patton says, "We need a room to meet in." So the private runs to this conference room, and there's all these GIs sitting around hanging out. He goes, "Guys, we got to get out of here. General Patton needs to have a meeting." I'm like, pfft. And they look over his shoulder. Patton followed him to the room. Everybody snaps to attention. They get the heck out of the room. Remember I was telling you about how important AEC is? That's where I got that story. It was from the veteran remembrances. So you can see that it's not, you can see Bastogne, but that's not the only attack. He's also got to go to Eternacht, and all he's got really is the 5th Infantry Division. You can see the 5 up there. And they've been fighting since the start, basically, of this battle. So Patton, figures out he's going to attack at 6:30 a.m. on December 23rd and start driving for Bastogne. At 12 noon, he's going to launch the 5th Infantry Division at Eternacht and try to take that town. So for Bastogne, you've got 3 divisions. You got the 4th Armored, one of the best armored divisions, in his army, the most experienced. He's got the 26th Infantry Division and the 80th Division, 2 veteran units. So he's going to have 3 divisions heading north for Bastogne. He's got the 5th Infantry Division going into Eternacht. Now they're going to have some support from elements of the 9th and the 10th Armored Divisions, but it's really going to be their fight. But he's got a secret weapon. The U.S. Army had been issued right around this time radar-controlled artillery shells, okay? So this is a new weapon of war. Shells hit the ground, they explode. This technology, they have radar in the nose, so when they get close to ground, they explode in the air. So a lot of that explosion is not going into the ground, it's being spread out. So the 5th Infantry guys fight the way to the ridges around Eternacht. They get pushed back the first time they attack. They attack the second time with these artillery shells. They make good progress. They surround the hills above it. And the artillery is so powerful, the Germans go to flee the town and take the one bridge over the river. But the shelling is so intense, they turn around and go back into the town. So the 5th Infantry is delayed getting in there. Now they're finally going to break through on the morning of December 26th. And this gives Patton so much peace because with Eternacht taken, the Germans cannot counterattack against his drive north to Bastogne. So it's safe. It's the troops in place that he has to fight. Fortunately, it's an airborne unit that doesn't have any tanks. The Germans were so concerned about Patton while they were making plans that the German commander, I forget his name off the top of my head, Brandenburger, he says, "Hey, I'm against this guy Patton. He's going to attack me immediately." And they said, "Don't worry, we're going to give you a whole armored division." They didn't. So that was a great benefit for Patton. So the morning of December 26th, when he gets the news that Eternacht is taken, he is greatly relieved. The only problem is Bastogne, okay? 4th Armored Division is driving for it. And so infantry divisions and armored divisions are made up of 3 elements. In the infantry division world, it's regiments. I'm sure you guys have heard of those. In the armored world, it's combat commands. You have Combat Command A, Combat Command B, and Combat Command R for reserve. So they're driving up to Bastogne, and everybody thinks it's going to be Combat Command A because the route they're taking is the only solidly paved road to Bastogne. And so, in fact, they're so confident about this, General Taylor, remember the division commander? He flies to Europe and gets with Combat Command A in a Jeep because he wants to get back to his division, I should mention December 23rd is at 12 noon. The Germans go into Bastogne with white flags and offer surrender to the airborne troops in there. And General McCulloch gives a one-word response, and that is nuts. What you don't hear about is the fact that he was in constant radio contact with Middleton and Patton. He knew that they had launched that attack at 6:30 in the morning, and they made about 3 miles that morning. So he knew that there was relief coming his way, and that had to give him some peace. And that kind of changes the story a little bit, because they're all fighting alone and isolated, but in reality, he knew the bigger picture and he knew relief was coming. So the Combat Command A that I talked about is on its way in. They think they're going to get there, the day before Christmas, but their tanks roll into a town called Hymel. And the Germans had brought in some heavy tanks. They weren't Panthers or Tigers. They were even bigger than that. They're almost like these big mobile artillery pieces. And the Germans start just pummeling the unit. I think it's the 8th Tank Battalion under a guy named Albin Erzik. And there's a large hill going down into the town. He had tanks go around the sides. He went down into the town, and that's when the Germans hit. And buildings were going up in flames. Tanks were getting hit. Men were going down. Erzik actually backs his tank back up the hill backwards. And when he realizes I'm out of the danger zone, he spins the turret around to see where he's going. And just then the tank gets hit. And the shell hit the back of the turret. Well, fortunately, there's a big iron block to balance off the cannon. And Erzik went down. He said he got up. His hand was bleeding. And he looked behind him, and there was a crack in the armor. And he said if they had hit anywhere else, the tank would have gone up. But they hit that right spot. And so he was able to pull out of it. But he's not going to be the one that gets there. So let me see. We're going to advance here. So that's the troops actually making the attack. By the way, there are very few, if any, photographs of Third Army during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. This is one of the few shots of the troops actually advancing north. All of the photographs, there was a 24-hour delay put on all photographs coming out of the area. And so, I looked and looked for photographs. This is the one photograph I found. When you look at pictures of the Battle of the Bulge, they're almost all January 44, after the Bulge was captured. This is one of the very few. This is the 26th Division, and now you can see the snow coming down. So there's Bastogne. The Germans have attacked north, east, and west. And I was telling you about the combat commands. So Combat Command A and B are fighting to get in. They're having a lot of difficulty. Combat Command R is in reserve, and they're told to go to this town called Sabret, which you can see by the bottom. There's going to be a German counterattack there. You guys got to go there and defend against it. Well, the tank commander with it is a guy named Craigton Abrams, and he's going to head up to it, but he's going to go to this little town called Clochemont. You can see it at the very bottom of the screen there, and it's a crossroads. And there's actually a little cemetery there. It's still there today. And they're preparing to go to Sabret, and he looks up and he sees all these airplanes flying over, cargo planes, heading for Bastogne to relieve the guys inside. And they start dropping cargo and everything, and parachuting it down, and he sees planes just dropping out of the sky. And he decides, you know what? What if we just made a hell for leather charge north? I know it's late. It's like 5:30, 6 o'clock. The sun's going to go down early in this part of the world this time. But he makes this decision. They radio it back to the Corps commander. He says, okay, give it a shot. And so he goes to this lieutenant named Bulge. And Bulge has what's called a jumbo tank. So I'm sure you've all heard the American tanks are no match for the German heavy tanks. Patton is constantly experimenting, like how do we improve our tanks? And so they decide if we put more armor on one tank, just slab after slab of it, that could be our lead tank, and that could absorb the punishment. And when they tested it out, they said the tank looked like a porcupine. It had so many shells sticking in it that didn't penetrate. So that's why they picked Bulge to be the lead. And Abrams basically walks over to him and says, go get those boys in Bastogne. So the real roadblock they've got ahead of them is this town, Assenois. You can see it right there also towards the bottom. And that's basically the German defense perimeter. And so what Abrams decides to do is they're going to hit it with artillery. They'll have a guy in a jeep, an artillery guy, and just as the tanks get to Assenois, they're going to call off the artillery. They'll charge through. The Germans will keep their heads down until the last second. Well, they start charging up to Assenois. The Germans start, returning fire, and they knock out the jeep with the radio guy in it. So the tanks go into the town while American artillery is flying around. The Germans start hand-to-hand fighting with them. One soldier is going to take out 2 German machine gun nests. He's also going to pull several guys out of a half-track that's on fire. He goes to try to take the flames out on some of these guys, but his canteen is so full of holes from German fire that he can't do it. But he's going to earn a Medal of Honor for that, and I kid you not, His name is Jimi Hendrix. And there is actually a memorial to Jimi Hendrix from Tennessee in Assiniboia. Now, in all of this firing, Bodges and his lead tank, he's got 2 tanks behind him, 2 armored personnel carriers, and another 2 tanks behind that. They managed to make it through the town, but just as that happens, the Germans hit a telephone pole. It lands on a half-track. So the entire offensive up to Bastogne is basically 4 tanks and 2 armored personnel half-tracks, okay? This is the entire attack. Abrams himself will jump out of his tank to try to wrestle this telephone pole off of the half-track. Now, while all of this is going on, a guy in an observation plane realizes what's happening and calls off the artillery. But like I said, the attack going into Bastogne is really just 3 tanks, 2 half-tracks, and another tank. There's the planes flying over that Abrams sees that he decides to launch his attack. So as Bodges is leading his small unit up, they're just firing into the woods to the left and the right. They're not going to stop and get into an engagement. That's not their job. Their job is to relieve Bastogne. The Germans are fighting back on this. Now, the tanks are moving faster than the half-tracks. The half-tracks are so loaded full of infantry that they start to space out. And the Germans, as the first 3 tanks pass by, run out into the road and lay mines. And the first half-track's going to hit it. So the guys in the half-track behind it and the tank behind it have to stop and run out into the road and pull these mines out of the road. So the attack into Bastogne is down to 3 tanks. Bodges rolls up on a big bunker that's half sunk in the ground, fires a bunch of rounds in it. He says he killed 20 guys in that bunker. I've been in it. It carries about 5, but I'm not going to doubt him. And as soon as he does this, he sees a bunch of soldiers, to his left. And he thinks they're in American uniforms, but he knows the Germans have been putting on American uniforms behind American lines. So he turns his cannon on them, and he says, I'm Lieutenant Bodges with 4th Armored Division, identify yourselves. And they don't say a word. So he says, again, I'm Lieutenant Bodges, 4th Armored Division, identify yourself. And one of the guys stands up, he says, Corporal Miller, 101st Airborne, damn glad to see you. And with that, Bastogne is relieved. That is the tank itself. You can see it's got a bunch of layers of armor in the front. And Bastogne is now American territory. Bodges will go into McCullough's headquarters, and McCullough will repeat the line, damn glad to see you. And that is how Patton relieved Bastogne and took Edirnacht. I can add, and so this photograph is actually taken the day after the relief. Remember I mentioned there's no real photos, that one photo of the attack going into Bastogne. Patton is going to go up to Bastogne on December 30th, and he's going to inspect the 101st. He's going to give medals to McCullough and one of his artillery commanders. When the Germans attacked from the west, it was glider troops were there, and the way the terrain was, it was 2 forests. Now, the Belgians farm their forests, okay? So they grow them in certain areas, they tear them down, so they regulate how they're using their wood and the lumber. So you can't go to it today, unfortunately, but back then it was 2 forests and a clear path. It was like downhill to a town. So the glidermen occupied the woods and that open ground in the middle. So when the tanks crested the hill and started coming down, the guys out in the field jumped up, ran into the woods. Once the tanks passed, they jumped back into the foxholes. When the supporting infantry came, they gunned them all down. Now, inside the town was one of the few, I should say, anti-tank guns and a few tanks, and they knocked out all the German tanks when they got down there. And so the commander's name was Chipwee or Chipweus. I've never really been sure, but Patton gives medals to both of them. And they tell him, he says, I'm going to go review the troops. They said, drive slowly so they can see you. And at one point, he drives up to this artillery officer with the 101st who's calling in artillery on tanks, and he climbs up this hill. His staff is freaking out. And he sees this guy calling them in, and an artillery round goes right in the open hatch of a German tank and blows up. And he says, good shooting, son. Another point, he drives up this road, and there's a bunch of guys laying on the ground. And he says, get the hell up. You're going to get pneumonia laying there. What he didn't know was right before he rolled up, there were Germans firing on these 2 guys. Patton kept a siren on his Jeep, so he was blaring the siren, driving up, and the Germans ran away. And so that's why they were laying there in the ground. But that's very much Patton. So we got the relief of Bastogne. There's Chipwee, and there's McCullough. And you can see they've got the medals on them, Distinguished Service Crosses. that Patton gave them both. If you go to the Bastogne barracks today, you can stand in that same spot. Yeah, and that's about it. How'd I do? We okay? So I'm happy to take any questions. And they can even be about the 6888. Yes.
He's got his left arm patch. Looks like it's probably 1st Armored Corps.
Yes. So
Was
Patton-
that his last command? Combat command?
No. So going into North Africa, Patton commanded the 1st Armored Corps. So when we were developing our troops in the United States, there were the Louisiana maneuvers in 1940, and they decided in the cafeteria of a schoolhouse there that we needed armored corps. And so they created the 1st and 2nd Armored Corps. So it's Roman numerals. Yep. I went right past it. Or maybe I didn't. So we had 2 armored corps, so they used Roman numerals. And so Patton's in charge of 1st Armored Corps. So when he gets the task of going into North Africa, they change the name to Western Task Force, but he keeps that patch on, 1st Armored Corps. And he would keep basically all the patches. He would have them all on his helmet of all his commands during World War II, but just kept that 1st Armored Corps patch on at all times.
Okay, thank you.
You learn a lot of obscure stuff when you do a lot of research.
Now, I kind of pride myself on knowledge of tanks in World War II.
Uh-oh, okay.
Well, in this sense, you've told me something that I had never heard. That actually Patton gave a shit that his men were dying right and left in inferior tanks
Yep,
because they're under armored.
yes.
And they tried to armor it themselves with bags of sand and logs and everything. And of course, it wasn't effective. And he really did not like that.
No, he did not like the sandbags or the logs because he felt like they slowed the tanks down. They were good because by the end of the war, the Germans are using Panzerfass, the shoulder-fired weapon. And when it would hit a surface, it would inject. So the idea was we have something outside the army, so it hits first and doesn't have the penetrating power once it goes in. We use the same thing on strikers in Afghanistan. The idea with RPGs, you have them explode before they make contact with the steel so they won't blow up. But like the wool cap, Patton hated those. I've got incidents after incidents, mostly with guys. I think it's the 16th Armored Division that comes in late, that he balls them out for having that. But to them, that was their number one cause of safety. Now, I talked about him making improvements. He also added a 3rd machine gun on the back of the turret. That was unique to 3rd Army. And they created, because of the mud they were dealing with in the SAR area, they created these duck bills that they would put on the tanks to make the
wider
track.
track.
So they're always trying to develop better. Now, there's a myth story out there. There's a book, is it Iron Cross, Purple Heart Boxes? It was Belton Cooper. He was with the 3rd Armored Division, wrote a book. And they talked about how the Pershing tanks, Patton said no to Pershing tanks because we have enough Shermans. That is pure fiction. No. Okay? The day that this meeting occurs that he has Patton in, Patton was making the trip to England from the Mediterranean. There was a meeting that same day of British tank officers, and so that got mixed in. I don't know if you guys have heard a guy named Steve Zaloga. He's a real nuts and bolts historian, does a lot of detail. I talked to him about it. And he said that he talked to Belton Cooper, the veteran who wrote the book, and Cooper said, well, everything I wrote about my experience I wrote, everything that's bigger picture, my shadow author wrote, so I don't know anything about it. But I've heard Cooper interviewed, and he would repeat that story, but it didn't happen.
We have had here the gunner of a Persian tank, and it was so far superior, right?
Yeah,
And of course, the Germans' tanks were superior. They just didn't make enough of them.
right.
We made so many of ours that we gave them away.
You got to remember, too, we have to bring our tanks across an ocean, so that you're not only going to get so many Pershing tanks over where the Pershing tank was still going through a lot of trials and things like that to get it up to speed. Now, when it does get to the battlefield, so the thing that all the GIs were afraid of, or terrified of, was the German 88. My veterans agree? Yeah. The Pershing tank had a 90 millimeter.
Yeah.
And in one of the battles, it shot at a Panther tank, went through the frontal armor, the bottom armor, and penetrated down into the ground. That's how much more powerful it was. Unfortunately, they come in so late in the war. We're talking like February of 45, and they're just diced out, just a few here and there to all the divisions. That really didn't make that big a difference. I mean, the GIs were glad to see it, but it was so late in the war. There were so few of them that it doesn't really change anything.
Per Patton's attitude, the public's attitude about Patton
Yeah.
was that he really didn't care that much about his men. And that's the public's attitude.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, and it was incorrect, right? But I'm pleased to hear that he was experimenting, probably in Europe,
Right.
about armoring these tanks, and rather successfully, it sounds like.
Yeah, so you're saying how the public didn't like Patton. That goes back to Sicily when he slapped 2 soldiers in hospitals, and the whole public turned against him. When we go into Normandy, and we're fighting in Normandy, it's basically World War I trench warfare, okay? We're advancing yards, that's it. It's basically a stalemate. And when Patton comes in the scene, now they've launched Operation Cobra, they've broken the hole, and he rushes through, and he starts spreading south, east, west. And, I've gone through newspapers. By the end of August, they're interviewing soldiers, and they're saying, he could slap us from morning till night, and we'd still fight for him. There were editorialists. There was one woman editorialist, I think she was in Pittsburgh, who just ranted against him in her columns. And the end of August 44, she goes, you know what? I complained about this guy, but he knows how to win. I'm a Patton fan now. And it's amazing the transformation his reputation takes in August of 1944. People talk about that Battle of the Bulge is his biggest victory. I think it's the race across France, because no one had seen anything like this before. It changes the attitude of the Allies. I was talking about that fighting in Normandy. Guys were trying to predict how many weeks they had to live. When they make that rush across France, they're talking about being home for Christmas. I mean, it's such an existential change that takes place in August of 44. And it took somebody with the courage to exploit a hole, because, if you go forward, they'll attack your flanks. It's no use doing this. He gives the idea of defending his flanks to his Air Force. Never been done before. He tells Opie Wyland, you're defending my flanks. He goes, it's never been done. He goes, well, then it'll work. And it does. Now, he has an advantage. While he races across France, parallel to his major attack is the Loire River. The Germans never crossed the Loire to attack him, so he has a natural barrier to help him out. But his philosophy is, if you move fast enough against your enemy, they're going to be so busy reeling, they're not going to have time to think. So when you get to end of August and the supplies start drying up, and we start moving equipment north for the attack into to Antwerp and not Antwerp, to Arnhem. People talk about how Market Garden takes his forces away. Well, the real element that's taken away from him was all these C-47s supplying him with gas, because they're not just going to move them one day to drop the paratroopers off. They have to have them there for weeks in advance. So he loses that vital fuel element that's going to lead to the stalemate in Metz and that area along the Moselle River. Okay, I answered way too long for that.
Our father
Yes?
followed Patton, and he was the cleanup crew.
Okay,
There was a lot of pissed off Germans that Patton didn't take care of,
okay,
and that's why he was making such good time.
yep.
He didn't wait and stop and try to let's battle everybody.
I've never,
And they had other people with artillery, or guns, not artillery, but that were following, and that's what our father did in World War II.
I've never heard a POW ever say I was really well taken care of. Both sides, all wars. Next. Whoever's got the microphone. Just talk loud. Yes.
At Fort Belvoir.
Yeah.
And I wish I could remember the story that the docent told. Maybe you know the story of how they came about finding that tank.
Well, it was out in a field getting all rusted over in Europe.
Right.
And so they put together the funds. So the Army Historical Foundation was the financial group that gathered the money to create that Army Museum. And I'm not going to brag about who their best employee was, because that's not my style. But I was actually their first employee. But yeah, it was basically rusting in a field. I think it was actually at an Army base in Germany, I think it was. And out, exposed to the elements and everything. And so they moved it back to the United States. Now, There is a Belgium, in Bastogne, there's a military base where they do refurbish tanks, but I don't know that they sent it there before they sent it back to the United States. However, you are correct. The actual first tank into Bastogne is at the Army Museum down near Fort Belvoir.
And as I recall, the docent said they didn't realize that was the first tank. They just uncovered the serial, the number on it.
Yep.
And did a little investigating and said, holy smokes, that's the first tank into Bastogne.
Yep.
And at the Bastogne barracks, they have a Sherman in there. You may be aware.
Well, they've got a ton of
they've
tanks
got
in
it.
there.
They've got it. They also have it marked up as, they know, they say, this is not the one that was the first one in, but they have it
A
marked
jumbo
up with the
tank.
chalk, just like that.
Yep. And just to add on to that, there's a tank in Bastogne Square that for decades had the 4th Armored Division patch on it. And they did some research when they went to refurbish it. Inside the turrets, all the interiors of tanks were painted white to help the guys in the dark, was a pink layer over the white. And when they finally found the guy, they realized it was an 11th Armored Division tank, which was fighting west of Bastogne. And one of the guys had a ton of bubble gum in his backpack that exploded because of the cold. And that's what the pink layer is, and that's how they identified that tank. Yes, sir. The guy with the mic.
Sorry. Hey, thank you for your presentation. I feel adequately checked because I would always tell my wife, these can't be pictures of the Bulge. There's no snow on the ground. So.
Well, if your wife has any questions too, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you for staying awake.
Yeah, she's a real trooper. She went to the 2 Battle of the Bulge conferences the last 2 years with me. So
She invited you, or you invited?
she invited me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was with the 5ID when it deactivated, and since you're an expert of all things Patton, I'm just curious because we deactivated and we got assimilated into the 2nd Armored Division. Our unit patches,
Red
as
Diamond.
you know, right, Red Diamond. But then when we got reassigned to the 2nd Armored, it went over our heart, and that was like for the entire division. I can't remember who it was. It might have been my platoon sergeant or even first sergeant at the time. We were like, okay, why is this? This is such a break from Army protocol. You know, it's always on the left shoulder.
Right.
We were told that the 2nd Armored Division was endeared to Patton's heart. So,
Correct.
oh, okay. So there,
Yeah.
I haven't met anybody to corroborate that story
Yes.
or give me any guidance on that. Okay.
So Patton commanded the 2nd Armored Division in the United States. Okay, when the division was raised up, he was I think he was one of the combat commanders. The actual commander, I think, had a heart attack or died, so Patton got the position. And he does a famous march across Georgia, and it gets in all the newspapers. And then he's in charge, right before he goes off to North Africa, he meets with the 2nd Armored guys. He can't even talk. He gets so choked up, and they're just applauding him because they love him. The 2nd Armored will land in Morocco, and then we'll fight, across North Africa. Actually, that goes into reserve. The 1st Armored Division does most of the fighting in North Africa. The 2nd Armored is going to fight in Sicily, but then it's going to go off to different commanders. But Patton always said that was the closest to his heart. In fact, his wife wrote a march song for the 2nd Armored, and they still use it today. Yeah. But the 5th Infantry Division, you ought to be proud of those guys. They got some of the toughest assignments and cracked all those nuts. And their commander, Irwin, performed so well that in, I think it's like March of 45, Matt Nettie, the 12th Corps commander, his cholesterol, some heart, is really bad. They promote Irwin to take over the Corps. So I think that's a testament of how good the 5th Infantry Division was. Okay. There was about 16 of them, so yeah. Right. There's a really good book about Patton called Patton's War that I think talks about that. Good author. The 11th Infantry Regiment of the 5th ID is the one that really always got the hard knocks to crack. Metz was a surrounded city. There was a Fort Driant on the other side of the Moselle, and they were the ones that cracked Fort Driant, and it was almost impenetrable. So be proud. All right?
Hi, Kevin.
Hey.
A plug for your books.
Oh, you
I've
don't
pretty
have
much
to do
gone
that.
through the majority of all the biographies, histories on Patton have been written since right after the war to current times. And the perspective that you take on your two, volume 1 and 2, new, fresh, different. Not a constant rehash, repeat, which you get tired of seeing all the time.
Yep.
So your volumes are well done. It's a new perspective. Congratulations. Waiting for volume 3.
Stop it.
Now, you were talking about the original Patton handwritten diary,
Yep.
transcribed back the pandemic times. Is there an easy access way to acquire them online?
Yes, they're all online.
I came across other versions, but the one that was just done here during the pandemic, that one I cannot seem to find.
Yeah, the Library of Congress Manuscripts Division is the one that did it, and it's really hard. So I would contact the Manuscripts Division, say, send me the link to Patton Diaries, and they'll do it. So I did not know about this when I wrote Volume 1. Volume 1 of Patton's War is North Africa, Sicily, England. The activation of Third Army on the continent, that's Volume 2, and I had just about finished the book when I made the realization, when the guys at the Library of Congress, hey, we've got this other resource. So I had to go back and rewrite the whole book with the new diary entries. So yes, you can get them through the Library of Congress.
There is not really an easy access way to get those.
Once they send you the link, it's easy because you have an option to show the handwritten version, and then they did a typed up version. Now, I've gotten good at reading his handwriting and that chicken scratch over the years, but I will rely on that, and I'll let them know if, like, guys, this is wrong, you got to fix this. But yes, so you can get it online, but I would contact Library of Congress Manuscripts Division and then get it. Now, to your other point about my brilliant books,
Did I say that they were brilliant?
it was implied.
Okay. They are.
The credit for that goes to my good friend John McManus. So my first book was called Patton's Photographs. I found the pictures that Patton took during World War II. My mentor, Martin Blumenson, helped me make that into a book. I figured I'm done with Patton now. And then Martin called me and said, I've got a contract to write a little 100-page book on Patton. Let's do it together. So I worked on that. I said, I'm done with Patton. And then 60th anniversary of D-Day, I was leading my very first tour, 2004. Met John McManus, great historian, and he said, you need to write the magnum opus book on Patton. And I said, that is a stupid idea. Everything's already been written. But then I thought about all the veteran interviews I'd seen where they talked about meeting Patton on the battlefield. And so every Saturday, and I'm very fortunate to live in DC where I've got the Library of Congress, National Archives at my fingertips. And so I would go to the Library of Congress every Saturday morning, and I think I went through 2,500 soldier memoirs and finding those little stories about Patton, and we just put them into the chapters. And then, spent hours and hours at Carlisle, and then the oral history collection at the Library of Congress, the veteran history collection, went through tons of that stuff, just finding those little stories. And then I would interview veterans for WW2 History Magazine. And so and then, when you work on something like that, other people come out of the woodwork and help you. And so I had people at the Library of Congress and archives like, oh, we just found this document, are you interested? I was at Carlisle, and one of the young ladies said, oh, we just got one of Patton Stafford's own photo albums. And that's where I found the story about nickel, dime, and cent, and all those other little elements. And I think that's what makes it interesting is I didn't regurgitate what all of my predecessors did. I was able to find new stuff. And I hope 20 years from now someone says my research is obsolete and finds even better stuff. Yep. Good lateral.
Just curious, I read Bill O'Reilly's book, Killing Patton, and I
Yeah.
found it ludicrous. I was curious of what your take was on it.
Well, first of all, Bill O'Reilly did not write that book, okay?
Well, true. His
Again,
name is on it.
The guy, what's his name, Duffy? So I was given a large sum of money by the publisher to edit that book. If you thought it was bad, you should have seen the version I saw. So the very first TV show I ever did was something called War Stories with Oliver North. And North was the one that told me that Rupert Murdoch owned a publishing company, so everybody who worked for Fox had to write books. So they'd have their name on something. He says, Kevin, I like writing books, but under this pressure, my staff has to do it. And so a friend of mine, Joe Balkowski, contacted me and said, hey, this publisher, they need an editor. They wanted me to do it. I said, you got to get Kevin. And I emailed Joe back as a total joke. I said, what is Bill O'Reilly writing Killing Patton? And I was right. So I felt bad because I was kind of a jerk editing it, like this never happened, this is from a novel. But the author actually contacted me and thanked me, and so we were kind of in communication. And when the book started to come out, Bill O'Reilly did a press conference or something, and he said, the accident scene where Patton's car is hit, there's no intersection there, this needs to be researched. And I emailed the author guy, and I said, hey, your boss is on TV saying there's no intersection. I've been to the intersection. You've been to the intersection. Am I wrong? And he goes, no, when you said cut that out, I cut it out. I said, well, you better tell the boss because I don't think he's read the book. So read history books written by historians is what I always like to say. And political books by politicians.
Yeah.
Yes.
20 years later, 1965, my group was one of the first basic trainees that went through Fort Hood, Texas, the 2nd Armored. So,
And was George S. Patton the fourth your commander?
I don't know who.
Okay.
They left to see the tanks, but they wouldn't let us touch them.
Were you in the National Guard?
We were basic trainees,
Okay.
one of the first group to go through. So, but yeah.
And more impressive, the year after I was born. But I'll tell you, I've been to Fort Hood. They have an amazing, so I think it's the 2nd Armored isn't headquartered there now, it's just the 1st Cav. But they have an armored park with tons of equipment and stuff. Kids love to run around it. They even have tanks from Iraq, from the Persian Gulf War. Pretty impressive collection. Yes?
So what would you like to tell us about the movie 6888?
Well, let's start talking for another hour. So the 6888 is the only all-black, all-female unit to fight overseas, to be sent overseas in World War II, okay? They're the only WAC unit. There are black nurses with the Black Infantry Division in Italy, but this is the only WAC unit sent over, and their job was to catch up a backlog of about 2 years of mail. They had a very specific mission that's not discussed in the movie because Tyler Perry's trying to tell a big story. These were the letters that would go to troops in the field, and if they'd been transferred to another unit, sent to a hospital, or killed, these letters and packages would just go back to England and fill up these warehouses. So in February of 1945, these women came overseas to do this. Now, every single woman in the Army, in the military, in World War II, we love to talk about Rangers and airborne guys. They're all volunteers. They're not draftees. Every woman who served in World War II was also a volunteer. Okay, they deserve the credit for that. All these women joined. They had different positions all over the country. And then they would see these notices. If you want to go overseas for combat, sign up. You'll go to Fort Oglethorpe. 855 women signed up for this unit. The black women signed up to do this. They go overseas. They're only given 6 months to break up this backlog. 17 million pieces of mail, a number of rat-infested warehouses. They face all kind of racism and sexism. A lot of the black soldiers think they've been brought over to be comfort women for them. They hear the N-word left and right, and people suspecting they have tails, all these other rumors. And they perform the task in 3 months, okay? Very strong leader, Charity Adams, commanding the battalion. I first learned about them in 2008. I was working for an Army program called Freedom Team Salute that honored people that helped the soldiers, family members, veterans, athletes, comedians that would go over to Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of my coworkers came to me and she said, hey, I found these 3 women from the 6888. I want to put on a ceremony for them. I said, I've never heard of this. I'm going to write a story about them. And so one of the veterans' names was Mary Ragland, and she lived in Northeast DC. And I went to her apartment, and while I was interviewing her, she went into her closet and pulled out this stack of papers and gave them to me. And I'm flicking, I said, Mary, what am I looking at? She says, well, I was the clerk for the battalion. I made copies of a lot of our documents. So here I had primary source material. I went over to the archives. I said, guys, I want to see every record you have from the 6888. They said, we don't have any. Most of the black units from World War II, their records were destroyed in 1948 when Harry Truman desegregated the military. They said, we're one big happy family. We're not going to have these separate units. We don't need the lineages anymore. Rather insidious, if you ask me. Anyway, so I wrote the story. I interviewed Mary. She was a prominent person in it. And then I moved on. I'm an historian. I got other topics to handle. I worked at Fort Leavenworth. I worked at Lackland Air Force Base. And when I was at Lackland, somebody called me from Leavenworth, and they said, hey, they're building a memorial to this 6888 thing. You got to call them. There's a number. They've got posters. So I called this guy, Carlton Philpott, and he said, I've been trying to reach you for 2 years, you know. And so we started talking. He said, we found 3 more vets, and we're going to put on a parade for them and everything and dedicate the monument. And I said, well, you know what? I like what you're doing. I'll tell you what, I'll do you a favor. I'll interview one of the ladies and write a story about her. And he said, man, I got the perfect woman for you. Her name is Lena Delicott King. And so she was a pill. She was a hoot. I do a lot of interviews. I usually interview a veteran 2 or 3 times. I talked to her like 10 times. She would call me at work, Kevin, I just thought of another story, you know, and delightful woman. So I wrote the story up, and I remember on our last interview, I said, well, you know, Lena, I'm going to see you at Fort Leavenworth. I'm going to fly in for the ceremony. And she says, that's great, Kevin, because talking to you, you sound just like Dr. Lewis Henry Gates. And I thought, oh my God, she thinks I'm black. And she's going to meet me and have a heart attack. I will have killed a veteran of World War II. And so I go to this event. I see her, I go, Lena, it's me, Kevin. And then she smiled. And she introduced me to everybody there, and everybody said kind of the same thing. You look different from what we thought you were going to look like. And I was like, I know, I'm sorry, I'm white. So before the story even ran in WW2 History Magazine, my publisher, Carl Nam, called me, and he said, listen, this has got movie written on it. This is a really interesting story. So he hooked me up with a producer, Carlota Espinoza, and her partner, Carrie Selig. And I didn't know anything about this stuff. I said, yeah, do whatever you want. And they called me up one day, and they said, Tyler Perry's going to call you in 2 days. And I went, yeah, right. And Tyler Perry called me 2 days later and said, I want to make this movie. And so from then on, Tyler and I were on the phone together every day, 2 or 3 times as he wrote the script. And he made me a technical advisor to the movie, so everything you saw wrong, you can blame me. But I think it's a very good movie. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. It's one of those kind of dreams that you don't even dream about. I write books, I write articles. Never had my mind set on Hollywood or movie making. So it's just a wonderful experience up and down. I could talk about it for hours, but I won't put you through that. But that's the 6888 story. Was it pretty accurate? Yes. So Lena Delicott King, she joined the Army because in high school she was friends with a white Jewish boy, Abram David, and he joins the Army Air Corps, later Army Air Forces, and is killed in combat on his first mission. And because of his death, she joins the Army. Now in the movie they made it a romantic thing, it wasn't that. But a lot of the scenes where they get kicked out of where they have to fight in the movie theater because they're black women sitting in the theater, that actually happened. When the general threatens to fire Charity Adams, the battalion commander, and replace her with a white officer, and she says, over my dead body, that is word for word from Charity Adams' memoir. Don't know the name of the general. He was actually a brigadier general. I actually went through her papers at the Library of Congress, and she didn't reveal it. So, yep. Yes, sir. She's well-viewed in God. Did she invest in this movie? Do you know? I don't know. Mandalay, so Tyler Perry invested in it. Kerry Washington invested in it. And, gosh, you're doing this to me. Peter Goober, who's the head of Mandalay Productions, who cares, right? He actually owns part of the LA Dodgers and the Golden State Warriors. So he's got a few bucks on him.
And it's up for an Oscar, right?
For the song.
Yeah.
I was really ticked it wasn't for screenplay because my name was on the screenplay package. But I can tell you that Goober brought, I don't know if you guys care about this, but he brought to the premiere, the Hollywood premiere, Mookie Betts from the LA Dodgers. And so Mookie sat next to me. He gave me a hug and said, what you've done is amazing. And I said, me? You won the World Series, dude. So that was quite cool.
As long as we're talking about movies and opening cans of worms, and no disrespect to you or any of the other authors who have written wonderful books about Patton.
Disrespect away.
But, you know, in popular culture, the movie Patton is how many of us grew up thinking about and learning about Patton.
Including the guy talking to you right now.
So what are the aspects of that movie that are absolutely true, and which are the ones that are absolutely false?
So the speech at the beginning of the movie, pretty much right on, but what they took out is there was a lot of practical information he provided. You know, he talked about the importance of truck drivers and guys strewing wire. You know, they're just as important as the guys in the front line, because if a guy says, I'm not driving my truck today, someone's going to get killed. Let's see, they skip over all of Morocco, basically. Well, the scene in Morocco where he's watching the troops pass I was always wondering why that was in the movie, because it's kind of long and it's just guys walking by him. It's not that exciting. When I was in Morocco, because I had a binder full of pictures of Patton, the guards let me inside the outer wall of the king's palace. And I walked around and I'm like, they filmed the whole Morocco scene in here. You know, they even had the guards with the green silk uniforms and red uniforms. You know, there's things that he says in the movie that he actually said, just not in the same context. When he says, you know, don't take Palermo, he goes, what do you want me to give it back? That was actually the 10th Armored Division in Trier when he said that. So they really got the essence of him down. I just went through the movie was based on Ladislas Farrago's book on Patton. And I was actually just up in Boston going through his papers, and there was an interview with Omar Bradley, and Bradley said, the thing about George, you give him a headline, he's good for another 30 miles. You know, I'm like, oh, that's a direct line in the movie. And Frank McCarthy, the producer, was actually an aide to General George C. Marshall. So there's a lot of, and if you read Ladislas Farrago's book, there's a lot of, it's right on the money on a lot of things. I'll tell you the one thing that bothered me, after the battle, after he relieves Bastogne, the Germans are looking at the map of, you know, Bastogne and Patton's attack, and then it burns up, and he says, you know, oh, it's over. I'm gonna kill myself like the Fuhrer. So Patton relieves Bastogne on December 27th, 1944. Hitler kills himself April 30th, 1945. They left the map up all that time. So, but it's a good introduction to Patton. That's what I think all movies are. You know, don't look for a movie to be accurate. Get excited about it, and then start reading. You know, and that's where you find the truth out. But they did a really pretty great job. Now, I'm in talks to create a mini-series out of my Patton books. So hopefully we'll be able to tell a new story about Patton based on those. Now that I'm all big Hollywood and everything. I don't know if I'll ever be able to come up to Pennsylvania and talk again.
You were probably already aware of this, but do you know who Patton's private pilot was before World War II officially began for
Nope.
us? It was Paul Tibbets.
Oh.
And Dutch Van Kirk told me that. He's from my hometown of Northumberland.
I've
And
never
that
seen-
is one of the reasons why he was chosen for the Enola Gay mission, because he was his private pilot to take him out to Texas to his ranch.
Okay.
And finally the military came in and said, you need to start using a military plane to go back and forth. And that's when that whole changed.
Huh,
But
I've never
it was
come
an
across his
interesting
name.
tidbit that I've never read anywhere, but I heard it firsthand from somebody who knew.
Who knows? I'll tell you, there was a point in the 1990s where I probably got a phone call a month from somebody saying, my neighbor says he was Patton's Jeep driver. I mean, there were more Patton Jeep drivers than there were days in the war. And I have a list of Patton's Jeep, it's like 3 guys, you know. In fact, there was a whole series I did called Patton 360, and they interviewed this guy, Stanza, who claims to be Patton's Jeep driver. And I called him up to interview him, and man, he could not hang that phone up fast enough. You know, I said, I've done all the research, so I'll just tell you the stories, you back them up. I'm really busy, kid. Call me tomorrow, and he wouldn't take the calls. And so I think he drove Patton once or twice. He was not Patton's Jeep driver. There was something else when you mentioned that you know, I do get a lot of questions that I cannot answer. Like on one of my Patton tours, I'll never forget this question. Someone said, Kevin, do you know how much Patton's house in California sold for last year? And the answer is no.
Well, he also was responsible for helping rescue the Lippens-Honor stallions.
Yes.
Because of his equestrian background and being in the Olympics and all that, and that's why when they were looking for someone who could help, they were worried the Russians were going to come in and eat them or kill
Right.
them and wipe out this ancient breed, that they said, who can help us? And the Allies, and everybody was like,
George S. Patton. So the Lippens-Honor stallions, they date back to the Hohenzollerns and everything, because, you know, horses were the form of transportation, and then the very rich, they would breed these great horses. And so during World War II, the Austrian in charge of them is trying to keep them all together and keep things going, and the German war effort's like, no, we need to breed these things, we need to pull cannons with them, and at one point they separate the males and the females. And so I always forget which it's the males or the females, because I've just gotten to that part in my writing. But it was actually the officer in charge of the 2nd Cavalry Division that talks to the Austrian who says, hey, can you go get the females? Or the Russians are going to get them. And so to my knowledge in my research, it never got as high as Patton. So they went and got him and brought him back. And so then they put on a horse show for Patton after they brought him back. And his attitude of it was like, oh, it was a very impressive show, but what the heck were these guys doing here training horses when there was a world war going on? So he wasn't totally enamored, but when they brought them finally to the United States, they put on a show. It was either I think it was in Washington, D.C., and Mrs. Patton, his wife, came to the show, and she came out and they put the spotlight on her and everything. So that's really the connection. It's not, there's a movie called The Miracle of Olympus Honors, Disney 1960s, and they portray it as, this big attack to get them, and Patton, that was very Hollywood. But at the very end of the movie, the horses are performing, and this guy stands up and applauds. That's the actual Austrian officer who was in charge of them.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Well, my friend David Simonson, he's since passed away, but he was one of the ones in charge. Not many people knew, and they went over nighttime across enemy lines to kind of pick these horses up.
Yep.
And we have it on record when he gave his talk at about 102 years old, but he didn't want anybody to know about it. So when it was written and we went to put it in the newspaper for him, the night before he called the journalist and said, "Don't you dare," because he was also then in the Battle of the Bulge, and his family, he never talked about it, and he wanted to keep it that way. But he told, he would tell us privately the stories about going across, and, the guys that were with him had no idea what they were picking up. He did, but the rest of them didn't.
There's actually a book, I think it didn't win the Pulitzer, but it was a New York Times bestseller list a couple years back called The White Horses or something. I actually read it. It's actually very good. So, when you do research on a book, a lot of people send you stuff and you just file it away. I'm like, I'll get to that later. And some veteran sent me not a handwritten thing, but a firsthand account of his role in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment getting the horses. I don't know if it's the same guy or not, but he sent it to me.
White horses, you said?
Yeah, I think it's called The White Horses. Or just book on Olympus Honor Stallions, you'll find it. Yep. Oh, I know this is going to be a good question.
Ladies and gentlemen, our former president, Mr. Kirk Gibson.
Thank you. Kevin, that was terrific.
Thank you.
Speaking of the Bulge, my friend John here and I had the privilege of serving with several Bulge participants of the 101st Airborne.
Never heard of it.
They were fabulous. Their charge in the early 60s was to make us better soldiers, and they were damn good at it, I think. One of whom was a guy named Ed Hunt, who was a PFC near Longchamp, had a recoilless anti-tank gun. Not effectively. The tanks were too far away. A machine gunner near him was badly wounded. He picked up the machine gun, laid withering fire on the tanks until they got to within 75 yards, at which point he picked up his tank gun again, took out the lead tank. The second tank said, "This isn't the place for me." The whole column turned around and went back to the woods, for which he was awarded the Silver Star. I have a picture of him receiving it from General Maxwell Taylor. Pretty neat guy. He is interred over here in Fort Indiantown Gap. We had a hell of a funeral for him a few years ago. But another guy, are you familiar with, after the war, sometime, maybe even as late as 1950, they had what they call the Military Olympics?
The military?
Olympics?
Yeah, right after World War II.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Patton and Eisenhower went and watched some of the sporting event.
Yeah, well, a fellow named Jack Luce won a race, a big race.
Okay.
The man that came in second name was
George S. Patton. No, I'm kidding.
Bruce Jenner's father, William Jenner.
Oh, geez, okay.
Of all things. And Jack Luce was a hell of a guy. In the annals of the 101st Airborne, he is praised for many, many reasons. He's a hell of a guy. He was unfortunately killed in a Jeep accident while he was in our company, but he was just a neat, neat man. But we had in our little company probably 6 or 7 World War II veterans, all of whom had some distinction. They were a terrific bunch of guys. They named it right when they named them the best generation. So,
I'll tell you a quick story about that. So, when I started leading tours in 2004, and subsequent tours, we had a lot of veterans come on them back then. And we had a guy, I think it was D Company 506, and really nice guy. And I'll always try to throw a little something into my talks when I feel like everybody's falling asleep. And so we're on the bus for a couple of hours. We're getting up, to the Bastogne area. And so he was sitting up right front. He was like half asleep. And I said, December 16th, 1944, the Germans launched this attack. Eisenhower has only 2 divisions in reserve, his 2 airborne divisions. And he's going to send them into the fight. And into Bastogne, he sends the 82nd Airborne. And man, if that guy didn't wake up like, Kevin! And I was like, just testing. So I'm a terrible person sometimes.
Any last questions? Up front. I'll be remiss, Patty reminded me to tell everybody in the beginning, I forgot, but we do have the veteran surveys out on the desk outside. So if you're a veteran and you haven't filled out your history, you can go there and turn it into AHAC, and they'll give you a contact call and ask you to come in for an interview if you'd like.
And it's not in vain, because people like me rely on that stuff. Stuff that you don't think is important, it might be very important to an historian.
Patton's main driver was John Mims?
Mims, yeah.
Okay. I came across Jeep Stanza, and I was researching him because he was from Schuylkill County, and he was raised not far from where my uncle was, who was in the 609th Tank Star Battalion. And I was talking to him, and I was a little leery about his being one of Patton's drivers. And I asked him, I says, well, what do you remember about John Mims? The response was, never heard the name.
Yeah, there you go. You punched a hole in it. I've unfortunately revealed a couple of fakers in my time, and it's not fun. You know, something that you hold so precious and think is so important is just fodder to somebody. Mac Evans, who claimed to be a D-Day survivor with the 29th Infantry Division, I interviewed him. Ambrose Tours had taken him to Europe several times, free on their dime, and so I interviewed him, and it was another veteran that said, I think he's a faker. And the other veteran was in the 8th Infantry Division. Nobody pretends to be in the 8th Infantry Division in World War II. And so I told Mac, I said, hey, I can't find any evidence of your being in the 29th. I said, but we can fix this. Send me the number on the back of your Bronze Star. I can research it. We got it. Well, Kevin, see, what happened was there was a fire in St. Louis, and my records were all destroyed. I wrote my congressman, and they sent me the medals. So I was like, I can't run this story, And so I was going to leave it at that. But he contacted another historian, and the guy called me and said, hey, he's threatening to sue you for defamation of character. So I wrote a researcher I know in St. Louis. That's where the Army the military personnel records are. He sent me the records. He was in a hospital in Oklahoma with pneumonia on June 6, 1944. He did serve. He guarded trains in Belgium. He served honorably, but recovered alcoholic, married 6 times, like all the elements were there. And so I had to pull the trigger, and he was disinvited. And he's in tons of documentaries. When you see those big anniversaries in Normandy, you can see him on stage when Clinton's shaking hands with the vets and stuff. They're there. They exist. Okay, I ended it on a negative note. All right, I'm going to end this on a positive note, or a really good vision of Patton here for you. I just came across this one. He goes into a hospital in Belgium in early 1945. A artillery unit with the 4th Armored Division had actually been shelled by their own troops. So these guys were in the hospital, and Patton comes in, and the guys are missing legs and arms and everything. And he comes up to this one soldier, and he says, what's wrong with you? And he says, well, I got bronchitis. And Patton's like, you lazy bum, how dare you? What unit are you with? He goes, well, 4th Armored Division. He goes, stay in bed, you've earned it, relax. He turns to the guy across the aisle missing a leg, and he starts talking to him, and he says, you know what, from your story of what you did, I'm going to give you a Silver Star right now. And he turns to his staffer and says, let's give this guy the Silver Star, and the aide goes, I'm out. And Patton chews him out in front of all these wounded soldiers. They're loving it. And he turns to me and goes, you will get that Silver Star tomorrow. What else can I get you? And the guy said, I would love some ice cream. The next day, in march a bunch of Patton staffers, pin the Silver Star on him, give everyone ice cream. That night, the soldier with the missing leg died. But I think that's an important story that shows you what Patton thought of his men in World War II. So that's a much better ending, right? All right. Now what do I do?
One moment. Let me work my way up there.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey.
Kevin, this is for you. One of our famous World War II round table coffee mugs. And I don't know if we have a copyright or not, but I guess maybe we should. But we actually sell them now. For years we never sold them. They were only for speakers, and they were like worth like gold or diamonds, it seemed like, but and we've been selling them about a year or two now. But anyway,
I heard
enjoy
you
that.
only gave these
I don't
to
even,
the
I don't
best
even have one
speakers.
myself, huh?
I heard you only gave these to the best speakers. Now anybody can have one.
Well, that includes you, one of our very good speakers here. Thank you, Kevin. And I want to say thanks to Kevin, too, because he braved the weather. We almost had our meeting canceled tonight. We had, a couple schools, all schools around the area were closed down. The church was open late at 12, and we barely had the meeting, so we're glad we could have the meeting. And we want to thank Kevin for braving the weather, the ice and the snow, all the way from D.C. to come up to us.
The word hero gets thrown around a lot these days, but in this case, you're right.
Sorry, I don't have any medals to put on your chest tonight, but we do thank you. We do thank you because I'm sure I have some other people out there would have said, no, can you reschedule? But thanks for doing it. Thanks for also, yes. And beyond that, we learned a lot. So those little personal stories that you told, and we had some from the audience too, told some stories about veterans as well. I'm a historian too, so when I researched some of that stuff, I found a lot of original stories that, were new information that, from questionnaires I had sent out to veterans and stuff like that, or found in archives, and you did a lot of the same. So that's really the human angle that really brings it out. And Dr. McManus did a lot of that too. Yep. So I know he's a friend of yours as well. So very good. And so Kevin, I just want to announce a few more things, and then we'll have you introduced to our crowd then.
Okay.
But they'll come to see you. So we have Ed Cottrell from North Carolina coming up here, our next speaker in March 6th. And then we have, he's a P-47 fighter pilot and combat guy, so he had a lot of missions. And one mission he got shot up by 2 German Me-109s, and they actually let him go. They could have finished him off, and he went home with an engine giving out. He landed on the ground, kissed the ground. So that kind of shows the heroism of him as a combat flyer. He'll be here next month. And then we have April Frank Stolar from, he was a veteran of the 36th Infantry Division and the 9th Air Force as well. He served Army Air Corps and Army Infantry as well. So guys, also I want to say thanks to you for braving the weather too to come out to us, be here. I want to say thanks to former President Kirk Gibson for coming tonight. Thank you, Kirk, for coming as well. Appreciate that. We also wish our best to Bill Jackson, former president. He's dealing with some health issues, and we hope for him the very best of recovery. So thanks, guys. Thanks so much. And please come see our speaker then. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Oh, yeah.